What is up, people? BP here, Value of Truth. Welcome to my channel. It's a very humble channel. Not a lot of people know about it. Not a lot of people watch it. But then again, I don't really upload often. I maintain a regular job and maintain a humble lifestyle, as you can see from the background. But anyways, that being said, today we're going to be talking about a story taken from this book right here, which is Martyrs Mirror. If you guys have never heard of this book was written in the 1600s by Thelman Javen Brott. It details the lives of Christians dating all the way back in the 1st century AD, starting with John the Baptist, Jesus Christ, and the original 12 disciples. And it talks about how their lives were and how they died. Okay, and then it goes all the way up to, like I said, the year 1660. A lot of people, what they don't know is that the Catholic Church was one of the main protagonists of this book here. And it's quite sad, really, because, you know, the Catholic Church, I think, means well. But unfortunately, a lot of paths, a lot of bad roads are paved with good intentions. So, unfortunately, in their zeal, they ended up persecuting real Bible-believing Christians, namely the Waldensians, the Anabaptists, and so forth. Okay, if you're like me, who's a Bible-believing Christian, a Baptist, a traditional Baptist, okay, we date our history, we trace it all the way back to Jesus Christ using books just like this. Okay, so this is a written piece of history. Okay, this is like set in stone. So if you guys want to read more about what the Christian church was like, okay, throughout the years and throughout the centuries, pick this book up, man. Okay, you can find it on eBay, Amazon. All right, I'll place the link in the description below if you want to purchase a copy for yourself. Okay, and in summary, okay, Jesus said that these things would happen to his followers. He predicted this. And he did it in such a way that makes you kind of stand in awe and respect of, wow, the accuracy of his prophecy is just astounding. And I'm going to read to you that prophecy here in Matthew chapter 10. It says in verse 17, "But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and they will scourge you in their synagogues, and you shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, take no thought how or what you shall speak, for it shall be given you, and that same hour what you shall speak. For it is not ye that speak, but the Spirit of your Father which speaketh in you." Now, in another place in the book of Luke, Jesus said that he would give us a mouth which all our adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. Okay. Now, in many cases in this book, and you'll read it for yourself if you want to read it for yourself, like online or purchase a copy, you can read this for free online. I'm also going to put that in the description below. But you can read the stories for yourself. That what would often happen is Christians would be brought before trial, like tribunals and councils and whatnot, sometimes before kings. Okay, I mean, we're talking like shoemakers, we're talking about barbers, we're talking about the most simple type of folk that you could possibly imagine. Farmers, okay, simple people, poor. Often they were poor, often they didn't have many possessions. But what would happen is they would be brought before these tribunals and councils, and then often they would be derided, made fun of, or sometimes debated often, even when death faced them in the most cruel and unusual ways. Okay, they were still demanded an answer. People still demanded answers from them from Scripture. And what they would do is they would often quote the Bible. And sometimes what you'll see is they quote like the Apocrypha sometimes, which is not considered canon per se, but that was part of what they did. Okay, so, but more often than not, they would quote the Bible from memory. I mean, just purely from their memory. And they would quote it word for word, which, if you think about it, actually confirms the authenticity and historicity of the Bible, because these stories, when they would quote the Bible word for word, their stories would be handwritten down by eyewitnesses and then placed in public libraries or places of government where the citizens could go and access these books and read it for themselves. And that's kind of what Thelman Javen Brott did, is he would go to the public records, pull these stories out. Like, I think some of it was done in like Amsterdam, Denmark, and so on. But he would grab these stories from public record, and these people would speak and quote the Bible word for word of what Scripture says, which confirms, hey, the accuracy of the King James Bible, the accuracy of the modern Scriptures that we have here in our possession, it is word for word the same Bible that they had hundreds of years ago. So I think that's very fascinating. But also, like I said, when you look at the prophecy that Jesus gave, he said, I will give you a mouth and wisdom which none of your adversaries shall be able to gainsay nor resist. And what would happen is when these Christians would be questioned and debated, they would give such a powerful testimony and such a powerful debate. No one could really stand before them. It was like being defeated. So, I mean, all of their adversaries were completely defeated in debates and in, being questioned. Okay, these are simple people. These were uneducated people. They never went to like higher education, higher learning. Okay, they were poor. And so it was nothing short but of a miracle. And then also there's some very interesting events that would happen that is recorded in this book. Things like God speaking from heaven, angels speaking from heaven. It was fascinating. What would happen is sometimes these Christians would be led up to the stake to be burned. And then what would happen is the people recording the story would actually hear a voice from heaven. And it would thunder. It was like, what was that? Other times, Christians would be put through the most horrific torture and things you can only imagine, that somehow they still survived. And oftentimes what would happen is some miracles would be performed, like miraculous healings. I mean, it is like nothing you've ever read before. It's just like reading the book of Acts. That's all I could say. It's just like reading the Bible itself when you read this stuff. And this is not just written by one person. Like the Bible, what people don't realize about the Bible is not just written by one person. It's written by multiple people throughout centuries, just like this. Okay? So when you read this book, it's just like reading the Bible, man. All these incredible stories of faith and heroic acts, heroism. I mean, there's a reason why this is perhaps one of my favorite books of all times, because it's history. It's forgotten history, to be honest. Not a lot of people know about this book. Not a lot of people have read this book. But if you get this book, if you read this book, you will find some of the most incredible stories on the planet. So I highly suggest it. And today we're going to be reading a story from page 129 and 130. And so there's a few stories in there that I wanted to cover because, I want to get through this book as much as I can before I die. Obviously, I never will. I mean, there's so much in here. There's no way I'm going to be able to cover all of this in my lifetime. But if you guys like this type of content, enjoy. You're gonna really be in for a treat. So you guys hang in there, and God bless and enjoy. All right, let's go ahead and get this party started. All right, so this says on page 129 of Martyrs Mirror, and by the way, you can go to homecomers.org to read this for yourself. You can read it for free. All right, so this says, how Septimus Florens Tertullian, through a certain apology, defended the Christians and sought to have them spared about the year 204. When the persecution of the true Christians would not cease, but increased the more, the pious man Septimus Florens Tertullian wrote an apology in defense of the Christians against the heathen, in which he refuted all the slanders with which they were assailed at that time, showing that they were innocent and were persecuted, not on account of any evil deeds as the heathen pretended, but simply on account of their name, and that nevertheless their religion was not weakened or injured by the bitterness of the persecution, but much rather helped and strengthened by it. Okay, so in summary, what this is saying is that the Christians were being persecuted not for any reason of wrongdoing or what they were doing was bad, but simply on the basis of religious persecution because of what they believed and what they stood for. Now, what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. But anyways, let's go ahead and continue. This says, among other things, he writes, oh, I know what I was going to say. I think this is the Tertullian that's often quoted by Thalmann Javan Brought in the book. And I'm pretty sure Tertullian was a historian, a Christian historian. But yes, he's often quoted in this book. If it's the same Tertullian, which I'm not sure, we'll have to see and read further. Okay, this says, among other things, he writes, we are increased and grow when we are mowed down by you. The blood of the Christians is the seed of the church. For who is there among you who, seeing these things, is not constrained to examine what there may be inside of this matter? Who, having examined it, does not join them, and having joined himself to them, does not wish to suffer with them. Okay, so basically what this is saying, or what Tertullian was saying here, is the blood of the Christians is the seed of the church. Essentially, there's really not much that the enemies of God could possibly do to get rid of the church, which fulfills prophecy, what Jesus said. He said that the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. And I'm actually reminded of one particular person by the name of Simon Greenleaf. And Simon Greenleaf, if you guys don't know who that is, you can find his story on my video, which is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You should be able to find it on my channel. But anyways, Simon Greenleaf was a lawyer who sought out to disprove the resurrection of Jesus Christ and ended up reversing his position. It's a very fascinating story. And I also think that his story is rooted in the movie of Ben-Hur as well, but I'm not quite sure. Let me just double check. We're going to go to av1611.org and just kind of go off for just a moment on a rabbit hole, but a good one. Resurrection. Okay, so I want you to kind of understand who Simon Greenleaf is. Okay, so Dr. Greenleaf, this is 1611 av1611.org. This talks about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Is it a fact or fiction? Did Jesus Christ actually rise from the dead? This says Dr. Greenleaf, the royal professor of law at Harvard University, was one of the greatest legal minds that ever lived. He wrote the famous legal volume entitled A Treatise on the Law of Evidence, considered by many the greatest legal volume ever written. Dr. Simon Greenleaf believed the resurrection of Jesus Christ was a hoax, and he determined once and for all to expose the myth of the resurrection. I've seen many stories like these, guys. This is not uncommon. What often happens with people who don't believe the Bible is they try to disprove it somehow. They go on this journey to try to look at the evidence, to look at the testimonies of the eyewitness accounts, specifically the 12 apostles, and they end up reversing their position. And it's not just the 12 apostles. You have to look at these people right here as well. These people, you have to just completely throw out the baby with the bathwater to just make the conclusion that Jesus Christ never lived, or, was not true, or whatever. Okay. The point is that people go on these long journeys to try to disprove Jesus Christ or the Bible, and they end up reversing their position because the evidence and the archaeology and everything we have points to this book. It points to the Bible. Now, after thoroughly examining the evidence for the resurrection, Dr. Greenleaf came to the exact opposite conclusion. He wrote a book entitled An Examination of the Testimony of the Four Evangelists by the Rules of Evidence Administered in the Courts of Justice, in which he emphatically stated, quote, "It was impossible that the apostles could have persisted in affirming the truths they had narrated, and had not Jesus Christ actually risen from the dead." Okay? Greenleaf concluded that according to the jurisdiction of legal evidence, the resurrection of Jesus Christ was the best supported event in all of history. Okay, there is more evidence that Jesus Christ rose from the dead than that Abraham Lincoln existed. Okay, so a lot of people will say, "Oh, you like that book, the Bible? You believe that book?" that's no more than a comic book. You believe in Spider-Man, and it's like, no, dude, do you believe that Abraham Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation? Do you believe that the Declaration of Independence was written, okay, for our country? Do you believe in George Washington? Do you believe these people existed? Okay, you're discounting historical documents. You're discounting something that actually happened. Okay, so yes, there is more evidence that Jesus Christ actually rose from the dead than pretty much anything else in the history of our world. Okay, now that was a nice little rabbit hole we went off in. I don't always suggest that, but in this case, it's a good one. All right. After this, he said these words, or at least words to this import. Quote, this sect, so he calls Christians according to the view of the heathen, will never perish or be extirpated, which, rest assured, when it seems to be cut down, is built up. For everyone, seeing their great patience when they are beaten and goaded, is incited to inquire into the cause of this, and when he has come to the knowledge of the truth, he instantly follows. So what often would happen back in the day, especially with like the Romans, they would take Christians and throw them to the lions. Okay, and the Colosseum, I don't know if you guys remember the Colosseum or know about it. Colosseum, Rome, not spelling it right. So if you go to Rome, all right, you can check out the Colosseum. Okay, it's been in many movies and whatnot. All right, but essentially what they would do is they would throw the Christians in these Colosseums for sport, just like watching football. Okay, but they would do it for the purpose of killing them. And often what would happen is the people in the stands would see these Christians getting eaten alive, and they would choose willingly from the stands of the Colosseum to be a Christian, and they would declare from their place of view and spectatorship, they would say, I am a Christian too. And yeah, sometimes they would be led as well down to be thrown to the lions that same day or whatever. But the point is that the impact that these Christians had on people was so powerful that it was like an explosion. Okay, if you go to Rome today, I believe it's Rome, but and also in Turkey, there's a lot of places in Europe where there's these catacombs, underground churches, underground civilizations, complete civilizations built underground, miles and miles. Okay, and why? Because the Christians were driven underground because of the persecution, and it was so impactful and exploded so much that it eventually led to the overturning of the pagan religions and established the Catholic Church. So that's kind of the history of the Catholic Church, really. In essence, it was born out of this persecution, and like I said, the Catholic Church really, in and of itself, was created for a good reason, and it served good purposes, but it ended up becoming corrupt like a lot of establishments. Like if you go to if you go and look at some of these popular old colleges in America, like Yale and Harvard, they started out as Christian colleges, but they ended up turning secular. Same with like in the UK, like Oxford and so on. They started out with Christian intent and became something else. But so unfortunately, the Catholic Church, I think, started out in a good way, and it was because of this sort of persecution. And very fascinating stuff. I love history. This is why history is probably one of my favorite topics. Okay, let's continue. Cessation of this persecution under I can't say that. Caracalla and Septimus Geta, the sons of Severus, about the year 213. Septimus Severus, having reigned 18 years as Roman emperor, his sons Antonius, I can't say that, Caracalla and Septimus Geta. I'm sorry, guys, I'm not the best reader, but you get the idea. Okay. Succeeded him as emperors about AD 213. These, although they were very unmerciful, cruel, and bloodthirsty, especially Caracalla, did not to any extent molest the Christians, so that did not to any extent molest the Christians, so that during their reign, very little, indeed almost no blood of the Christians was shed in the countries over which their dominion extended, which continued until about the year 219. Some write that the cessation of the persecution continued for about 38 years, during which time, however, Maximin the Giant greatly vexed many bishops, elders, and deacons, that is, the overseers over some churches, but whether they were punished with death will be shown in the proper place. However, it is stated that this fifth persecution, which had just commenced, did not cease entirely, though it was a desirable time, as Tertullian writes, when compared with the preceding severe and bloody persecutions. Okay, so some of the historians that Thelman Javen brought quotes from is often Tertullian and also Eusebius. So these guys are often quoted in his book, Martyrs Mirror. And as you can see, Tertullian tries to defend the persecution of the church in such a way to show that, hey, basically the church is invincible. If you're going to go after the church, just so you know, you're fighting against God, because those are his children, and the blood of the Christians is the seed of the church. So the more blood they spill, the more it grew. It just did nothing to stop them. All right. Reinstitution of this persecution under Alexander Severus, the son of Antonius. And didn't I just read this? No. I read. Okay. Sorry. The son of Antonianus Amamia, about the year 223. All right, you have to understand, guys, this book is hundreds of years old. Okay, we're reading like some ancient stuff here. All right, the followers of Jesus Christ, having enjoyed some respite during this time and a few years previous, the envy and hatred of some against the Christians increased to such an extent that even Alexander Severus, who otherwise favored the Christians, yea, had built them a church, and according to the manner of the heathen had placed Christ among the number of the so-called gods, commenced a persecution against them, or at least continued the one begun under Septimus Severus. This was occasionally principally as Lactantius Firminius gosh, states by some of the Roman jurists who, through wrong interpretation of the laws, but especially through a deadly hatred against the Christians, incited and urged on the emperor to persecute them. Among those who instigated the emperor, there is chiefly mentioned Alpianus, who was not only a senator, but also a master of requests and the emperor's tutor, so that the latter considered him as his father. Hence, the accusations of Alpianus against the Christians found the more easily a willing ear with the emperor. Lactantius Firminius calls this Alpianus and his adherents murderers, because they made wicked laws against the godly. He says, for we read of blasphemous laws and unjust disputes of the jurists against the Christians. Domitius, surnamed Alpianus, mentioned above, in his 7th book of the office of the governors of the Roman provinces, hunted out and collected the edicts and decrees of the princes, as of Nero, Domitian, Trajan, etc., in order to send therefrom instructions how they should punish the Christians who served and confessed the true God. Okay, so this guy, Domitius, hunted these Christians. I mean, some people hunt deer and hogs. These people hunted Christians. Okay, that's crazy. Okay, so let's see. And I think this is just kind of giving reference to where he's getting this information. All right, Agapitus Calapodius. I can't say these names, guys, but you kind of get this. All right, so this says, and others put to death for the name of Christ about the year 223. It is stated that in the last persecution resumed under Alexandrius Severus, there were put to death among different other persons for the name of Jesus Christ and the testimony of the evangelical truth. Agapitus, a youth of 15 years, Calapodius, an elder of whom P.J. Twisk, he also quotes P.J. Twisk a lot. I don't know who that is. Of whom P.J. Twisk writes, though 2 years earlier than Gysius, that he was apprehended for the doctrine of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and refusing to sacrifice to the heathen gods, was dragged with great ignominy through the city of Rome and drowned in the Tiber. I think that's the Tiberias River. Tiberius and Valerianus, 2 brothers, were likewise put to death, as well as Quiritius and his mother Julia, and Cecilia and Martina, both of them virgins, all of whom were put to death for the name of Jesus Christ, either in the water or in the fire or by the sword or in some other manner. And then he quotes also the reference for that one. All right, this says Henricus Narcissus. Wow. I guess that's where they get the word Narcissus. That must have been a popular name back then. Henricus Narcissus Julius Eusebius and others put to death for the faith during this persecution. Okay, so Eusebius. I wonder if that's the same Eusebius that he quotes from. I'm not sure. It could just be a popular name. All right, besides those whom we have mentioned as having been slain in the 5th persecution, Seb Frank names several very virtuous believers who suffered and were deprived of life for the same cause, namely Henricus, bishop of the Church of Lyons, Narcissus, a patriarch at Jerusalem, Julius and Eusebius. Speaking of Narcissus, I know there's an ancient story of Narcissus. That's a name or a word that we hear quite often, and you guys should definitely look up the story of Narcissus. It's like an ancient legend or whatever. Story of Narcissus. Okay, one of the most intriguing tales from Greek mythology is an example of Boeotian parodistic cautionary tale, a story meant to teach by counterexample. Basically, he fell in love with his own reflection, but his reflection wouldn't love him back, and he died from misery from that. But you can actually go Google search this story and check it out. But yeah, it's a kind of interesting thing. Let's see if there's a picture of him. Yeah, he fell in love with his own reflection, I guess. And yeah, that's where we get the word narcissist from. So, yeah. This is often a problem in our culture, which we see is like a lot of narcissists, people that are in love with themselves and they don't love anyone else. That's what the Bible talks about. It talks about people becoming lovers of their own selves. The problem is when you love yourself or you love your reflection doesn't love you back. All right, think of TikTok and all these other social media queens and kings. It's sad. It's very sad. But I think the word is often abused quite a bit because you hear a lot of, it's typically the female gender. They're often saying, "Oh, he was a narcissist. My ex was a narcissist." And I'm thinking, were you the narcissist? Because who was the one spending the most time in front of the mirror? Okay. So, yeah, but hey, takes one to know one, I guess, right? I wonder if I'm a narcissist, man, because I do spend some time in front of the mirror, but I like to shave and look good. So, man, I gotta work on that. Gotta love God more than you love yourself, my friend. All right, so let's see here. Where are we? Let's go ahead and finish this up. Okay, so Eusebius. He mentions Eusebius. I don't really know if that's the same Eusebius that he quotes from quite frequently, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was put to death around this time. But yeah, so Thelman Javenbrod, he often quotes from Eusebius and P.J. Twisk and Tertullian. I think I'm saying that right. All right, so this says, of the 6th persecution of the Christians commenced under Maximin, AD 237. The 6th persecution of the Christians, writes J. Gysius, arose under the Emperor Maximin, a naturally cruel man, and was directed again. I can't see because my camera's in the way. I've just kind of moved this over. It's going to fall. Hang on, guys. Let me just see if I can read this. But it's okay. Was directed against persons of respectability since he was of low origin, as well as against the Christians, but especially against the ministers of the word. Fortunately for the Christians, this wonder if I can move this so I can read it. Having trouble navigating with my computer. Hang on just a second. This is really not easy. Okay, I think this might work. Okay. The sixth persecution of the Christians, writes J. Gysius, arose under the Emperor Maximin. I can't say that right. A naturally cruel man, and was directed against persons of respectability since he was of low origin, as well as against the Christians, but especially against the ministers of the word. Fortunately for the Christians, this persecution was brief, since he reigned but 2 years. And as he was a violent enemy of the ministers of the church, the persecution commenced on them as the teachers and authors, it is said, of the Christian religion, for it was thought that if they were removed, the common people could easily be drawn away from it. Then Origen, a teacher of the church, in order to exhort the Christians to steadfastness, wrote a book on martyrdom, dedicating it to Ambrose, overseer of the church at Milan, and Procoptus, learned men of that time. All right, so he mentions Origen as well. Origen is very famous historian of that time as well in the ancients. All right, so touching the cause of these persecutions, the author of the introduction, etc., writes thus: the heathen had such hatred for the Christians at that time that whenever an earthquake, a storm, or the like occurred, they laid it to the charge of the Christians, saying that their gods were offended because their honor was waning on account of the Christians, from which it is to be inferred that they treated the Christians in an awful manner. Okay, and then he gives all these different references, which I really don't know. I haven't done my research to find out what these references are, but as you can see here, he mentions, it looks like Eusebius. So like I said, he often quotes from them. And then here's another one, Baronius, and then the Chronicle AD 237. So he's done quite the work in his lifetime. Thelman J. Van Brott was quite the brain, and he did quite the research. So very fascinating stuff. But anyways, I don't know if I could really summarize this. This was very hard to follow, as is most of it. But yeah, so the Christians were looked at like the bad guys because they were drawing people away to their belief system. And yeah, just a lot of persecution under Maximin, Emperor Maximin, naturally cruel man. Okay. Very interesting stuff. So guys, stay tuned. I will make more videos like this one. I hope you enjoyed it despite my inability to read properly and to pronounce all these different names. But once again, this is a book that's over 400 years old. And then that book is quoting from different ancient writers from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century AD. So very, very fascinating stuff. But you guys enjoy, and you guys have a wonderful day. And if you guys are not saved, make sure to follow the sinner's prayer contained in some of these videos that I make. And there should be one in this video as well. You guys have a great day.